All right, so what we're doing today is going over chapter 3. All right, it's an essential chapter of the book. It's really probably the most important for you guys. It's really getting into expanding on chapter 1. All right, so you're not just understanding arguments, but you're understanding how to judge arguments, which is really crucial. So this is going to be iterative, meaning what I cover, what I explain will come up again later, and then that'll reference back, and then it will reinforce what we're doing here, because you really need to learn some of this terminology. All right, so the basics. Arguments come in two forms, deductive and inductive. So some people like to classify abduction as a separate type of argument, although here we're going to treat it as a type of inductive reasoning. That's more of a theoretical concern that really shouldn't concern you so much. You could make a good argument that there are only two types of arguments, deductive and inductive. And at least for this class, we're going to treat it that way, all right? Most important is being able to judge an argument, and that's what chapter 3 is going to teach you, the skills how to do that. You'll have to develop that on your own. But we'll do exercises here for you guys to actually become proficient in it. So the two factors in judging a good argument. Oh shoot, you can't even see that. Only teaching a Zoom class. All right, hang on. You guys didn't say anything. You gotta tell me you can't see anything. All right. For those of you on Zoom, the people in this class actually can't see the PowerPoint. All right, now here it is. All right, so deductive and inductive, those are the only two types of argument. A good argument is one that has the right structure and where the premises are true. All right, so it has to have those two components. All right, so someone explain this last bullet point to me. A good argument must be valid or strong, but a valid or strong argument is not necessarily a good argument. So you only really know that if you read chapter 3. Can someone explain why that's the case? So a good argument there's no such thing as an argument that's good, that's not valid or strong, but there can be arguments that are valid and strong that are not good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's one way of putting it, but it's not just deductive arguments. Yeah, so in simple language, what's the reason? Can anyone explain it? So you can have a valid argument or a strong argument that has false premises, right? That makes it a bad argument. So remember that second bullet point there, it has to have the right structure. So that means it's going to be called valid or strong, but then when you go and analyze the premises, they also have to be true, okay? So let's get into some examples here. All right, so these are adapted from the text. I changed it a little bit because I didn't necessarily like how they're phrased. So all dogs have brains. Bowser is a dog, so Bowser has a brain. So when you want to ask if you're trying to figure out if it's an argument is deductive or inductive, you have to ask the first question. All right, let's go through this. We're following this 4-step procedure that's in chapter 3, and I'll explain that in detail. You have to ask if the premises are true, is it the case that the conclusion must be true? All right, so what you're doing is you're bracketing off the truthfulness of the premises. You're just assuming they're true just to check the structure to see if the inference is good. All right, so all dogs have brains. Bowser is a dog. So does it follow that Bowser has a brain? Is that conclusion necessary? Must that be true? It is, right? So if those two premises are true, then that must follow. All right, that's how deductive logic works. It must be the case if the premises are true.
All right,
all men are mortal. What's that?
PowerPoint. I don't think you can see the PowerPoint on Zoom.
You can't see the PowerPoint?
I don't think it's changing the slides.
Are you seeing structure and truth?
We're seeing the title.
Do you guys see the structure and truth slide?
We're seeing the chapter 3 right now, I think.
Yeah, we just see the beginning chapter 3 title page.
All right, let me unshare the screen and then reshare it and see if that works. All right, do you guys see structure and truth now?
Yes.
Okay, so that did it. All right, And all right, so all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. All right, so if those premises are true, then that conclusion must be true. All right, so those are valid deductive arguments. Professor is smart. All smart people are wealthy. Therefore, professor is wealthy. Now, is that a valid argument? What do you guys think sitting here? Is that a valid argument? It is valid, but is it a good argument? It's not. Why? Yeah, so it's not, one of the premises is false, right? All smart people are not wealthy. So it's a valid argument, but it's not a good argument. And technically, the language we use for the deductive arguments that are where the premises are true, it's sound. So it's not a sound argument. It's unsound. All right. So these are strong inductive arguments. 95% of dogs don't have fleas. Therefore, Bowser, my dog, is very likely doesn't have fleas. So when you're trying to figure out, and these are the two questions that's in the text. When you're trying to figure out if an argument is inductive, you have to ask, is it the case that if these premises are true, the conclusion is very likely to be true? All right, that's the type of inference we're looking for. Not, it's definitely true, it's very likely. All right, so 95% of dogs don't have fleas. Bowser's a dog, so he likely doesn't have fleas. Is that a strong argument? Yeah, it is, right? Now, if the premises are true, then we say it's cogent, right? Let's say, 95% of the dogs have, let's say that's false. I just made up that statistic. It's not actually true. That would make it a weak argument because it doesn't follow, right? Or sorry, that would make it not cogent. So it's still strong, right? Because that has to do with the structure. All right, the second issue is whether or not it's cogent, whether or not the premises are true. All right, most of the students who have COVID-19 are self-isolating. Therefore, a student in this classroom probably doesn't have COVID-19. All right, scientific studies show that 99% of dogs have 3 eyes. So it's likely that the next dog I see will have 3 eyes. So is that a strong argument? Yeah, that is a strong argument, right? So remember, you're asking, the question for this is, if the premises are true, is the conclusion that follows very likely to be true? And that is the case. All right, so that's the first part of what you're doing. And then the second part is going to be assessing the truthfulness. All right, so let's walk through the steps, all right? So first, this is exactly how it is in the book. And there are a number of different ways that you could go through. You can create steps that analyze things in a different way. So just pay attention to what we're doing here, because this is exactly how it is in the book, right? And that's the method you guys have to learn for this, at least for this class. All right, so step 1 is checking if there's an argument or not. All right, I'm just giving an overview, then we'll go into the details in a minute. Step 2 is you're basically checking for a deductive argument. All right, and step 2, let's say it's called step 2A, is checking if it's deductive. If it is, step 2B will then be to check for the truthfulness of the premises. And as we call that the soundness, all right? So if it's not a valid argument, meaning it's not a deductive argument, you move on to the next step, step 3, which is checking if it's an inductive argument. All right, and remember, you're asking that question, is it the case that if the premises are true, its conclusion is very probably true, right? So if that's the kind of argument, right, it's what we call a strong argument, it's inductive, all right, then you'll move on to step 3B, which is checking the truthfulness of the premises, all right? And we call that cogency. So these terms you have to memorize. It's just like any other game that you might play, like, football, there's a quarterback, there's a linebacker, there's an end zone, right? And you just got to memorize those terms. It's not, you don't get all hung up on that. So in ordinary use, strong and valid, they might mean different things. You might use them in a more fluid way. But in critical thinking and in logic, they're really very specific things, right? So you just got to memorize what those terms mean in the relationship to deductive and inductive arguments, right? So it will take a little memorization for you to get the hang of this, all right? But it's not a lot. Only 2 types of arguments, right? It's not a lot. It's not going to be a lot to learn, but there is some to learn here, to memorize. All right, so if it's not a valid argument, and if it's not a strong argument, right? If it's not a structurally good deductive or inductive argument, your next step is step 4, trying to figure out what kind of bad argument is it, right? Is it a failed deductive argument, which we call an invalid argument, or is it a failed inductive argument, which is weak, right? And so that fails that test. So for an invalid argument, right, when you ask the question, is it the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true? Right? If that's not the case, then it's going to be invalid if it's attempting to be deductive. All right. So let's go through the steps, and we'll go back and forth referencing those 4 steps. Again, guys, this is all chapter 3. So when I asked you to read chapter 3 last week, this should all be in your memory banks, and this should be reinforcement, right? All right. So up here I have, these images. Remember, language comes in all kinds of forms. So it's not everything that you're going to hear is going to be an argument, right? So you can have just a bunch of premises, in the middle, a bunch of conclusions, unsupported assertions, right? I am Godzilla, my mother is Mothra, right? It is raining diamonds, right? You could say anything without any, so there's no argument there. What you need is premises and a conclusion, right? And specifically, premises that are connected to a conclusion by logical inference, all right? And this is from chapter 1, so this is a little bit of a review here. So remember, all arguments have the premises, right? And all arguments have a conclusion, and then all arguments are also, the premises are connected to the conclusion through logical inference. And the type of logical inference is what we're going to get into with the deductive and inductive. They're different, right? But the very basic gist of it is that reasons have to be offered for the claim, right? Like, does anyone know there is a planet or moon, forget what it was, that where it does rain diamonds? Anyone know where that is? Want to study physics, study planets, that kind of thing. There is one planet where they're guessing that, based on evidence, that it rains diamonds. No? All right. So you need reasons to support your claim. And in chapter 3, it also tells you to use the techniques from chapter 1, and in no particular order, bullet points here. So you have to, these are skills you already have from reading chapter 1, right? Separate the argument from non-argumentative prose, differentiate statements from non-statements, find the conclusion first, then the premises, pay attention to indicator words, therefore, thus, due to the fact of, all these kinds of words tip you off. And then check for inference, right? Just make sure that reasons are offered for the claim, right? That's what the inference is referring to. So all deductive arguments are in this form. All right, they're premises and conclusions and inference, that's all arguments, right? But the type of inference in the arrow, they have to have logically conclusive support, all right, the conclusion. That's the specific type of inference we're looking for, all right? So remember, you're asking, is it the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true, logically conclusive? And here's a kind of a conceptual hierarchy for you guys to look at. So, all right, deductive arguments can be valid or invalid. All right, a valid argument can be sound and unsound. And where I have on the box that's circled there, or that's in that other rectangle, step 2, that's what step 2 is concerned with. So step 2A, all right, is that logical structure part. Right? When you ask that question, is it the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true? Right? That's checking if it's valid. If your answer is yes, it's valid, the next step, right, step 2B, is to check the truthfulness of the premises. Is it a sound argument or an unsound argument? If it's unsound, what do we say about that argument? We say it's bad, right? That's a bad argument. And if it's sound, we say it's good, right? So this is very specific technical criteria for you guys to say good argument, bad argument. So it's not like, oh, it's so subjective, I don't know. These are the criteria. And let's go back real quick to the 4 steps here. So remember, we're on step 2. You're checking for a valid argument. All right, that's the first thing you do. All right. And I'll go to the specific example in the text after we go, get the big picture with the concepts here. All right. The next type of argument, remember, only 2, right, is inductive argument. So an inductively strong argument, again, has a conclusion and premises, but note that the logical inference is different, right? So we're looking for very probable support, not conclusive, right? And the question you're asking there is it the case that if the premises are true, its conclusion is very probably true, right? So you want to know that. So, an example is, I don't know if I mentioned this one before, but if we want to know the composition of the gases in this room, and I'm going to guess it's like 21% oxygen, right? And if I really wanted to figure that out, what would I do? How would I do that? What do you suggest I take a sample? Maybe I sample the air. Because one thing I can't do is actually get my hands on every single molecule in this room. Can't do that. All right. So what I have to do is take a sample. That's a reasonable sample, checking for airflow, and taking all the kind of things into consideration, and then we'll be able to say, within a margin of error, there's, you'll get into the statistics of this when we get into later chapters. But you can't say 100% definitely that's what it is. You can say, well, it's most likely 21.2%, whatever it is. Anyone actually know the composition of oxygen in the atmosphere right now? It used to be higher. And that's why we used to have giant dragonflies, because the higher oxygen, the insects grow bigger. But now they can't. You guys ever see that in natural history museums, like giant insects? We can't grow them anymore because of the oxygen levels. So anyway, all science is inductive because it relies on empirical evidence and it relies on sampling. And you can't take infinite, and you can't check all the swans. We can only check the swans that we have access to. Right? So very probable. So here's the conceptual outline for this. Is the terminology. You guys just got to learn these terms, right? So inductive arguments can be strong or weak. And the strong ones are, remember, it's that same question. Is it the case that if these premises are true, the conclusion is very likely to be true? All right, so that's a strong argument. And then you check to see, you go back and see, but are the premises true? If they are true, it's cogent. And if they're not true, the argument is not cogent. And then what is a not cogent argument? What do we call that? What kind of argument is that? What? Bad. That's a bad argument. All right, so good and bad. Very technical, specific things we're dealing with here, right? And something I should point out to you guys, so there are basically two standards of truth here, right? So for the deductive arguments, we're looking at soundness, and that's binary. It's true or false, right? I am holding a mask right now. I am holding a mask right now. Those are both statements that can be true or false. Now, with inductive arguments, we're looking at cogency, and you could put that on a scale. All right, I just put this up here. This is arbitrary. You can make up any scale you want, but you definitely have not cogent. All right, it's not true. All right, you have instances of that. But then you also have cases where you might have a scale from slightly cogent up to extremely cogent. So you might have something like, is smoking bad for your health? So there wasn't always scientific evidence for this. So let's say before any scientific evidence, controlled studies, well-done studies came out, you had a kind of intuition or your own anecdotal experience. You looked around and maybe some people are coughing and you thought they seem unhealthy. So maybe you say slightly cogent, right? That smoking is bad for you. And let's say the first scientific study came out that reasonably demonstrated that smoking was somehow bad for you in some way. So maybe we say now that's moderately cogent. Numerous studies, right? Study after study confirming it, right? And then, so let's say we're up to extremely cogent, right? You're pretty sure that smoking is bad for you, right? And we know that through evidence, right? You could say you're 99% sure it's bad for you. We can't say completely with inductive logic, but you're pretty sure enough to pass the bar of, I know that it's bad for me, right? So this is in this chart here. This is more what inductive arguments look like. It's just that, if you don't do this, it makes it look a little bit more like deductive reasoning than it is, right? Because there are shades within that, right? There are different sort of studies, and the evidence is, there are different kinds of evidence to weigh. So you can say there's not cogent, and then there's shades of cogency, right? All right, and then step 4, if you can see this, this is the whole kind of conceptual terminological hierarchy here. So you get an argument. There are 2 types of argument. All right, there are 4 terms that we use to talk about the structural integrity of these arguments. Right, valid, and strong, invalid, weak, and then what we call arguments that are valid and that where the premises are true. Right, so sound and then cogent. All right. And step 4 deals with that. So let's go back now to, let's see. Let's go back to, all right, so here's the first example of a deductive argument. All right, so unless we do something about the massive AIDS epidemic in Africa, the whole continent will be decimated within 6 months. Second premise, unfortunately, we won't do anything about the AIDS epidemic in Africa. Conclusion, it necessarily follows that the whole of Africa will be decimated within 6 months. All right, so step 1, find the argument. It's just done for you, right? The premises are labeled and everything, so that's done. But guys, remember, in real life, you got to try to pick out the argument, and like we'll do after we get these 4 steps down. You will often have to reconstruct implicit premises that people leave out or we leave out in our own thinking, right? So you got to make it explicit so we can analyze it. All right, step 2. We ask, is it the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true? In this case, it is, right? So remember, we're bracketing off if the premises are true or not. We're just taking it for granted they're true, just to check the structure. And yeah, this is intended to be a deductive argument. All right, so the next step then is, we can call that 2B, right? So 2A, yeah, it's a valid argument, right? 2B, but are the premises true? So premise 1 is false because under current conditions, it would take longer than 6 months for the epidemic to decimate the whole continent. And then premise 2 is at least dubious, right? At least questionable, because we can't predict the future. Is it really the case that the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation will do nothing about it? Will no one donate if there was an AIDS epidemic? Will no one do anything? I don't know. It's at least questionable, right? So what we have then is a deductively valid argument. Remember, that's just, the structure's fine, but it's unsound because the premises are false or questionable. So it's a bad argument in the end. And it's a little confusing because it's hard to say, like, if you're not used to the terminology, wait, it's valid and it's bad? Because it's like, I thought valid meant good. So you have to memorize the terms. You got to get used to that language, all right? Valid is just a technical term for the logical structure of it, all right? So it's valid, but unsound. All right, so let's do the inductive argument. This week, under pressure from the ACLU, the school board rescinded its policy of allowing school-sponsored public prayers at football games. Premise 2, all school board members agreed. Premise 3, and a memo from the board was circulated to all students that there will be no more public prayers. Conclusion, let's face it, the days of public prayers at our school football games are over. All right, so it's an argument. It's all labeled. All right, that's done for you. Step 2. So we can see that even if the premises are true, the conclusion can still be false. All right, so in the book they mentioned things like it could be protests by school prayer advocates. Maybe there's a legal hiccup about processing something like that. So it's not guaranteed that that's what's going to happen. So it's not a deductive argument. It's not the case that it must be true. But when we go to step 3, we see that if the premises are true, the conclusion is likely to be true, right? So it's a strong inductive argument, but is it cogent, right? Is it a good argument? So if the premises are true, it's cogent. So in something like this, you'd have to go see, right? All the school board members agreed to the policy. We'll have to check, is that the case? Let's look at the record. Did they agree to it? So we'll have to go and analyze it. And that's the kind of thing you guys will do in your papers too, right? You'll have an argument, you'll have premises, and you'll have paragraphs supporting it and saying, WHO, the statistics cite this, children malnutrition, whatever you guys are arguing about in your papers, you will back it up, right? You'll have a good argument. But it's definitely a strong argument. It might be cogent if these are true, all right? So here, let's go to the example that they offer, and if we get to step 4, where it's not a deductively valid argument, and it's not an inductively strong argument. So what is it? Is it a invalid argument or a weak argument? Which one is it? All right. So the example they use is, all right, if you act like Bart Simpson, you will be respected by all your classmates. But you don't act like Bart Simpson, it follows that you will not be respected by your classmates. All right, so is it the case that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true? It is not. There may be numerous paths to being respected by your classmates, so it's not necessarily the case, all right? It's not inductively strong either. right? It's not likely to be true if the premises are true. So it's not a good deductive or inductive argument. It's not valid or strong. And so step 4 then, remember we're dealing with sort of the rejected arguments here. Step 4, is it invalid or is it weak? It resembles an inductive argument in its language, right? So it follows that as a very deductive way of talking. And as you'll see in chapter 4, this is a classic, always invalid form of argumentation. All right, so it's a deductively invalid argument. But realistically, we go back to these 4 steps. The main thing is really, obviously step 1, you gotta have an argument to analyze, and then steps 2 and 3. If it's not a valid argument and it's not a strong argument, it really doesn't have any, it doesn't require any time from us. It's not anything that we should consider believing, right? For the sake of maybe repairing or curiosity, you can see how it went wrong. If there's a premise in there that is true, but the structure is bad, you might need to take a closer look at things. If you guys have encountered beliefs in your head or in society that you thought were true but seem not to be supported, it may be worth it to get into it a little bit and just make sure, before you throw away that belief. And then it'll help you too, so. Yeah, ideally, what you do is, you adopt this way of thinking, and then you just put all your beliefs through it. That's the critical thinking process, at least. All right, so I think I will end this part here. And so next time, what I'll get into is, let me see how much time I have. I'll actually get into uncovering the implied premises a little bit here. All right, so out there in the real world, a lot of the arguments are going to, first of all, people won't be structuring arguments in very explicit ways. So they won't be thinking about inductive and deductive forms of logic and what the standards are and this kind of thing. But there will be some sense that they're supporting a conclusion with premises. But often there will be unsupported, there will be missing pieces in supporting a claim. So here are examples from the text. So the easy availability of assault rifles in the US has increased the risk of death and injury for society as a whole. Therefore, assault rifles should be banned. So there's something missing there, right? There's a silent premise that's added in the second paragraph there in yellow or orange. So anything that increases the risk of death and injury for society as a whole should be banned. So that gives us something that we can then analyze, right? And one way to go, we won't get into that now, we'll get into that more for the next chapter, but one way to do that would be to look at counterexamples, all right? And that premise is, as the text outlines, is dubious, right? So, we'd have to ban automobiles, you'd have to ban blenders, ban all kinds of things that, because you could argue that all kinds of mundane things do increase the risk of death for society. So you'd have to modify that at a minimum, right, to make that a good argument. And that's a little worrisome because we often believe things like that. Assault rifles should be banned, all right? People getting killed all the time. So it just sounds like something that we might believe without stopping to look at it more closely. So anyway, implied premise, you make it visible, and now we can analyze it. All right, let's see the other example. All right, so anyone who craves political power cannot be trusted to serve the public interest. Senator Blowhard can't be trusted to serve the public interest. All right, so what's missing is an orange next. Senator Blowhard craves political power. All right, so that's a factual issue. All right, so the three rules that the text uses that are also helpful for us in uncovering implied premises is again, we're starting with valid arguments. You're going to try to make it a deductive argument, and if that doesn't work, then you're going to go to trying to make it an inductive argument, right? So first is search for a credible premise that would make the argument valid, all right? And the two stipulations are, stipulation A, look for a premise that is plausible, so that could be true or that could be thought to be true. And then B, it should fit with the author's intent, all right? As far as you can understand what the person speaking is trying to do, the point that they're trying to make. All right. So if that doesn't work, step one, making it a valid argument. Search for a credible premise that would make it an argument that is as strong as possible, right? So an inductive argument. And then you could take a look at the reconstituted argument. All right. So let's go through the 3 steps. So if the Fed lowers interest rates one more time, there will be a deep recession. Telling you there's going to be a deep recession. All right, so obviously what's missing here, the Fed has lowered interest rates again. All right, so that's plausible, and it seems to fit with the author's intent. All right, and that makes it a deductive argument. And this one isn't good because it's not clear that, that's what follows from the interest rates. But it is a valid argument at that point. All right, Security Officer Jones lied in her employment application about whether she had a criminal record. Security Officer Jones will do a lousy job screening passengers for weapons. All right, a lot of different premises could go there, right? So what the text does, we'll just stick with the text examples, and we'll do a little more freewheeling once we get to you guys doing your own arguments. All right. So to try to make it valid, we could do something like any security officer at the airport who has lied on his or her employment application about having a criminal record will do a lousy job. All right, so that would be making it a deductive argument, right? So anyone who does that, so you can't lie on that and then do a good job. It's literally impossible. That seems like a stretch, right? Because you can imagine someone might be a liar here, but still I can lie, be dishonest, but I can also then scan people with the wand, no problem, right? So it's kind of a dubious connection. Better would be to make it inductive, all right? So that's step 2. Most security officers at LaGuardia Airport who have lied on their employment applications about having a criminal record will do a lousy job. All right, so there it's most, maybe you'll find a few people that are, magnificent liars and then also excellent at using the security equipment. So you can, make it, maybe a little bit more plausible, but making it inductive. All right, so it's a good argument if the premises are true, all right? Might not be. All right, we could get into examples of like, the president is sleazy, therefore he will do a bad job at task X, whatever task the president is supposed to do, right? You can look at it that way. All right, let's see. All right, well, let's leave it there. So remember, the main thing is, let me put these 3 steps up. All right, so just try to remember those 2 stipulations. Just like with assessing the arguments, first check to see if you can make it deductive. And if that doesn't seem like it works, try to make it inductive. And then those 2 stipulations. It has to be, plausible. It has to make sense and seem like it could be true, right? And then the other, it can't conflict with the point that the author is trying to make. But you shouldn't, at least when you're trying to evaluate arguments, you shouldn't like really transform it so much that it's not at all what the person was saying. You have to stick with the intent of what the person was trying to argue. There's a lot of examples. We'll get into more uncovering implied premises when we talk about the moral arguments, because there's a lot of implied premises when people make moral arguments, about abortion or about any topic at all. Right? There's a lot of hidden stuff that once you unearth it, it makes it a lot easier to evaluate. All right, so here's a challenge for the Zoom people. I have to show a video, and I'm not sure the best way to show you guys. If I send you a link, can you just mute me and then watch that on your own?
Yeah, that should work.
Can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let me open this up. Let me get you a link. So I'll explain what we're going to do before we start watching the video. All right, so this one's 8 minutes long. Let me send this out to you. All right, so before you watch that video, what we're going to do is we're going to watch this, and this topic is political storytelling, and you're going to pay attention to, there are a couple of steps that are involved there, And I'm going to have you, I'll put you guys into breakout rooms, and we're going to have, and you guys here too, so pay attention to the steps. I'm going to have you guys do this experiment, do kind of similar process for our upcoming presidential elections. So as you know, probably, you got Biden and Harris versus Trump and Pence, and they're going to have to do what you see in this video, right? And part of what we're doing is, so the first step is you're going to put your mind into this way of doing things, and it's very different from critical thinking. It's very different from the kind of thing that we're doing here. And we're going to do a kind of juxtaposition involving arguments afterwards, all right? But the first step is watch that video, and then I'll put you guys into breakout rooms, and then what you'll produce is two different versions, the Biden version and the Trump version of this, all right? So go ahead and mute me so you don't hear all this stuff, and I'm going to play this video for the students in the classroom, all right? I have to mute myself? All right. Where is it? Down here? Okay. All right, so people on Zoom, are you able to watch that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great, great. So you probably can't see this, but I drew this on the board here. So organizing information. All right, on the one hand, you've got story, right? What are the factors of a good story? And obviously you can have a whole class on that, just like running a whole class on, what is a good argument, what's good critical thinking. But we'll follow his narrative arc version, which is, you need a hero, villain, the resolution, and I'll put that up in a PowerPoint in a minute, right? But notice how really different it is from having an argument and a good argument, right? So how reason is the major component of arguments, right? Well, emotions are probably the major component of storytelling, right? And it's troubling, and this will connect to some of our other topics. It's our technology addiction topic, for instance, before, with if we're not aware of companies being able to hijack and play with our emotions and our responses to things, right? All right, so let me put up the PowerPoint here for you guys to look at, because I've summarized. All right, share screen. So just to summarize from what you just saw, so for instance, all right, so Bush, Cheney in 2000. All right, so he presents these 5 elements in the storytelling. So remember, what we're doing with creating arguments is you got to know if it's inductive or deductive, strong or valid, cogent or sound. Those are our terms, right? So if you now switch out of that and into the storytelling mode, right, you're looking at threat, victims, villain, hero, resolution, right? And arguably that's how a lot of how you are going to vote is going to be based on that, right? So what we're trying to do here's Bush, Cheney, 2000. Threat, cultural drift under Clinton, right? Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office and all that. Victims, our society, lack of morality. Villain, Bill Clinton. Hero, George W. Bush. And then bringing honor and dignity to the White House as a resolution. And then that changed later, right? He wasn't running against Clinton anymore in 2004. Instead, the threat was international terrorism, victims 9/11. Villain, Al Qaeda. Hero is George W. Bush, and a very aggressive position against foreign threats. All right, so what you're going to do then in your groups is Donald Trump is telling a story to get himself elected. All right, and his people, they're all working like people like this, coming up with the story that they're going to tell. Right, law and order, whatever it is, right? Whatever you guys, however you want to do that in your groups. And then Joe Biden is also telling a story, right? Joe Biden is telling a kind of story to get himself elected. And it has to fall into these 5 things. So Biden is going to say, this is what the threat is, right? 2, who are the victims, right? And so both Trump and Biden need to come up with this kind of story. So what you guys are going to do in your groups is, in person, have one person be your kind of note-taker person, and do this for both Trump and Biden, right? Just reintroduce yourselves, because there's probably different new groups. And so come up with it for Trump and Biden. And then afterwards, we'll do sort of, we'll try to get at this from a more critical thinking perspective once we can get into it from this storytelling perspective too, right? So let me figure out how to put you guys into groups on Zoom. And for you guys, why don't you move a little bit closer to each other so you can talk, and you 3 can be a group too, right? Let's see. Stop video. Let's see. Breakout rooms. Okay, let's do 12. All right. All right, guys. So you can join the rooms if you're on the thing. Why is the camera not looking at me? Yeah, so pick whoever you want first. And it could be there are a number of different ways to slice it. You know, it seems to change depending on the events that are happening, right? So you couldn't have predicted 9/11. I mean, you know, some people did predict 9/11, but you know, in terms of its political significance, you know, you could predict it, and that became the message, right? So right now, there seems to be a message that Trump is adopting, maybe several messages, and same thing with Biden, you know, to counterpose. So I'll leave this up here so you can use that as your reference. Who are you guys starting with? Okay. Why is that? No, it's just note how people in both cases didn't agree with Bush on the issues. Who are you guys starting with? Do both at the same time? Okay. Yeah, all right. Antifa. And did you see what Trump said about the shooting of the police officers in Los Angeles? Yeah, you guys haven't seen it. That's kind of a major headline right now. So Trump and Biden talk very differently about that. Trump?
Yeah.
How does he do it? He must have people.
I have a theory. It's a little biased politically, but
I think he has people around him that only tweet for him. Is that possible? Like, I've got an idea. Tweet this, or maybe he gives him a topic, and then he just tweet about that topic.
imitating Trump's tone is very hard.
I know, it's because so many people have done it so well. It's hard to do it.
So what would be the fake ones? It's like the law. It's like the president of radical leftist.
And you guys finished either one of them?
Joe Biden would be like the villain. Yeah.
I think it's amazing that the campaign manager for Bush said on all the important issues, people agreed with Gore, his opponent, the Democrats. So basically, people like climate change, environment, energy, whatever policies, people agreed with Gore. Because sort of in their heads, logically, right? They agree with him.
Gore did win the popular vote.
Then he grew a beard. He had a breakdown. Yeah, nobody won the popular vote too.
Republicans have only won the popular vote once since 2000, and they won the majority of the election.
I heard "Make America Great Again."
So that
Yeah.
it was great again, and then it got worse again.
You're over there. No, you're over there. That's not how it works. It's over here. It's emotional, right?
Don't think about it.
Don't think of that's right. Don't worry about it. Don't worry your pretty little head about it.
Like the hero of
Here, I'll put sample resolutions back up here so you can see. Okay, this one's probably more similar for right now, right? I think Biden's trying to do something like that, similar.
He's like full conspiracy. It's like even Republicans have like decades about it. It's not.
Do you guys have one of them done already? You do? Trump one? Do you guys have one? Do you have Trump done that? Okay. So how are you guys doing in the groups? Do you have the 5 elements of the narrative arc for both Trump and Biden yet? Why don't you type in the chat if you do? I'll check the chat if I can figure it out. Where is it? Where's chat? You think so? More hilarious than the presidential one? They're feisty. Yeah. And it's comes across entertaining to me. I imagine he'll be composed.
I'm excited for the presidential debates only because I want to see the excuses after for why either candidate can perform. It'll just be really funny.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll be, everyone will complain about the moderators, of course.
I don't think it'll be as good as last time, but I think it'll be good.
What, Trump, Clinton? Yeah. Rocking behind her with the chair, remember that?
I just wish either candidate was below like 75 years old.
I know.
Like I don't know why Americans really like old people.
Has anyone heard any kind of plausible reasons for this? Why Biden was the best that the Democrats could come up with to go against Trump?
Such a meter.
Just
There's
get
nothing
any,
left.
There's nothing. Just get any good-looking woman or man in a suit or pantsuit To go, right? Anyone.
I thought people.
There is nothing left.
There's no one left. Yeah. I mean, I guess who knows? I mean, your theories are as good as mine about with that one.
Like you had to go into like the internal politicking of the DNC, and it's like, what was there to do? There was no real like black horse candidate that they could just throw out of nowhere.
You know, I think if you're whoever said that, like there's no one left, it's probably the person that, so everyone's top picks, someone vetoed that. You know, so I want Sanders. No, we can't have Sanders. Oh, I want Buttigieg. No, I don't want. So all the top picks have been vetoed by powerful blocks within the party, and the only thing left is old Joe, right? That's it. It's like, fine, I guess he's all right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, settle for Biden. That's us. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what you got. Let's do. So what story did you guys come up with for Trump then? Walk us through the threat, victims, villain, hero. So we got. The swamp. The swamp is the threat. Okay.
Yeah, we had that's the down for the villain that established in 14 BC. But the threat was the overall theme of politics. That's going the villain was people.
Wait, which people? So a threat is the swamp. The victims are who?
The American people.
Okay. So like citizens, something like that. And then the villain was who? Swamp monsters?
Yeah. Okay.
Like who? Would Joe Biden be one?
Sure, Joe Biden.
So any established politicians who are like making a decent amount of money, maybe. All those people. Yeah. All right. Swamp creatures. All right. For who's the hero?
Trump and his staff.
Trump and staff. All right. All right. And then resolution.
This resolution was down COVID recovery and the economy and the trade war with China. He's been pushing that, ever since March.
Well, that's a little disconnected from the villain that you guys have identified. Right? I'd almost say, there's no right and wrong here, but I'd almost say like this was the first time he was running. So like look at in 2000, George W. Bush. It was they just had Bill Clinton. Everyone's exhausted of this sex scandal, right? So now this is what was then, bringing honor to the White House. Then, while he was president, 9/11 happened, international terrorism. So the narrative shifted, right? And so I think with Trump, you have a similar situation where, yeah, at first he was the swamp and all these swamp creatures, and I'm going to get rid of them. I'm going to hire businessmen or whatever. I'm going to, so that was, I think it sounds like that's what it was the first time in 2016, but I don't know if that's going to be the same right now. So, well, let's see what the other group got. What did you guys get for the threat? What was it for Trump? Okay, radical left. Can you be more specific?
A lot of his tweets just say like the radical communists just going there.
Okay.
They're very.
Would Black Lives Matter?
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter. Okay, so also Black Lives Matter. So like so what would be a term that you think would be? Well, let's see. Let's go back to that once we get the rest of these out. All right. So victims.
Real Americans.
Who? Wealthy people.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen what Trump has threatened will happen if Biden gets elected? What?
That's pretty big.
So I think in line with like what you're saying is something like the suburbs will be flooded with low-income people, and if you elect Biden, or something like that. But if you guys aren't aware of that, that's not going to be part of your story. But that's another story. So you're saying wealthy people? Is that who you want to put here? Wealthy. So is his message, would it be oriented to people who are not well off too? Should they be worried about
like
the radical
middle
left?
class, I guess, not the lower class.
Working class people wouldn't be they wouldn't resonate with this message? All right, so you guys are a little fuzzy on this. All right, so I'm not sure you know what to put down for that for you guys, right? All right, so let's go to the next one. All right, villain. Who's the villain then in this if the threat is all of these left-leaning groups and movements and protesters? So who's the villain? Oh, okay. Well, see, this is a little disconnected, right? So if the threat is that, then what would a washed-up old politician, how's he a villain?
That's, just call him that.
So it sounds like there are a couple of different stories that you guys are kind of weaving together. It doesn't really mesh really. So the nicknames Trump calls him Sleepy Joe, these kinds of things, mocking him. It's definitely not elevating him to a kind of a threat in terms of these people. It would be a different kind of threat. All right, so Joe Biden is your threat. Average middle-income people and above are the victims. And the hero would be who here? Trump is the hero. All right, in what way? So what would he do so 5, what would he do that would resolve the situation?
Stop the radical left.
How?
Like what he's doing with the protests, he's going to stop them with force. So Trump.
So let's say one of the politicians has part of the story, the resolution is defund the police, right? So how does that, if we take that one element, so one way you could do this to create a story is, look at the headlines. Go to like any major news website, see what is Biden or Trump saying about any kind of current situation, right? And then you fit that into here, right? Well, let's do this with Biden now. Let's just get that out, see what you guys have. So what do you have for Biden, the story that he's telling you guys? So what's the threat for Biden?
The threat for Biden is like people in the White House, the executive branch.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like Congress or anything. It's like people just focusing on Trump.
Definitely, yeah. So how many New York Times editorials have there been that Trump is the greatest threat to democracy ever, right? So a lot. So Trump and his people are the threat, and who are the victims?
The American people again.
Okay. Yeah.
They're kind of, his narrative is like Trump's imposing stuff that they don't want.
Yeah, and probably even in their narrative, probably even people who vote for Trump because they just don't know any better, right, or something like that. All right, and the villain
is Trump.
It's Trump himself, right? So, like you guys are saying, settle for Biden, right? Another sign in my neighborhood says, anyone but Trump, right? It's that kind of sentiment is really the major sentiment happening there. All right, so the villain is just Trump, right? Elect a telephone pole, anything except Trump is the idea, right? Right. So, and the hero in this case would be what?
Biden, but also kind of what you said, just like to get him out of office.
Yeah.
Is kind of the hero of the story.
So, what does Biden represent? Like, if you're just to forget about Biden, the 78-year-old guy, and all this, all his gaps, all this stuff. What does he represent? What does he symbolize that Trump is not? That people who would vote for Biden want? What does he symbolize? He's not Bernie Sanders. He's not. So he represents something specific, right? What were you gonna say? Yeah, something maybe like something old-fashioned, like how it used to be, like just a career politician. We respect them. Politicians are like milkmen. They're just trusted parts of life. They're not swamp creatures. They're definitely not that. They're just good, honest civil servants. So he represents that. So the hero is like, old trusty politician fighting for the right policies or something, just normalcy maybe, right? He's also was attached to Obama, and Obama represents something positive in a lot of people's minds, right? So he might represent Obama, normalcy, kind of triumph of democracy, right? And then the resolution would be what?
We say bringing respectful leadership back into the White House. It's kind of similar to what you're just saying, bringing like somebody normal, somebody who
Yeah,
putting somebody like that back into hell.
that's interesting. All right, how about you guys? Let's go through what your narrative was for Biden.
Ours are like all the same.
Oh, yeah?
Basically, you said threat, basically the president.
So the threat, what do you guys identify there?
What?
The threat, was it Trump as well?
Yeah. And then victim said America, villain said Trump, hero said Joe Biden, and resolution getting Donald Trump out of office.
So if I give you guys an issue like Black Lives Matter, could you put it through the narrative, like how they could put it into their narratives? But you guys got to get the story straight a little bit first, right? With, you know, it sounds like you guys had the older campaign, 2016 campaign with like the swamp and all that kind of stuff. I don't know that that's going to be the emphasis this time, right? But, you know, however this works out, you guys get the gist of it, right? There's a storytelling, and good stories will play on your emotions, right? And that's very different from, you know, arguments which we could say are policies, right? So, all right, let me see, how much time do we have here? Oh, we're done, right? So let me see how many people are here. All right, guys, so we're done. I'll be in communication with you guys. If you people on Zoom want to come back in person on Wednesday, you're welcome to. Otherwise, you can stay in Zoom, that's fine. The camera keeps like turning away from me. All right, guys, so I'll see you on Wednesday. And you people, give me your papers, please, all right? And then I'll give them back to you for next time.